And now, from the Donna Smallwood Senior Activity Center in Parma, Ohio, Generation Station TV presents Parma Senior Connection.
Hi, I'm Lukas here at the Parma Senior Center. This is Live with Lukas, and today we have our friend Joe. Joe, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Joseph William McQuarrie, and I feel blessed to be part of this.
Well, we feel blessed to have you here.
Thank you.
To be able to do this. This is a great opportunity.
I'm supposed to tell my life story. Well, I was born in Mill Grove, Missouri, which is a small community in northern Missouri, and it was a difficult time during the Great Depression, and my dad worked for a farmer, and he worked 12 hours a day and lived in a one-room house with 3 children, and received $1 and some fruit and vegetables, milk, because when they would milk the cows, he would always have all the milk we needed as children. And so those were difficult years.
Interesting.
But we later in 1935, I was born, and none of us were born in the hospital. We were born at home.
Wow.
And with a midwife. A neighbor would come over and help deliver the babies. So later my dad wanted to find a job which would make a little more money, so he rode on a freight train north into Iowa and found a job at the John Morrell Meatpacking Company. And so when he got enough money, he moved us from Mill Grove, Missouri to Ottumwa, Iowa. And we went to live in a little house behind my aunt and uncle. And it was a small house, and we were doing pretty good. And when my dad got very sick, and he would have died, but they took him into University Hospital and removed part of his skull because he had a mastoid infection. And that's what they did in those days. And it was the early days of penicillin, and they didn't have all the conveniences of like they have today. So he was out of work for about 6 months. But my mother went to work and worked in the cafeteria of the hospital and earned a little money. But I'm trying to think of exactly. I'm going back a few years now. This was in the 30s. Wow. But when the war broke out in 1941, my dad had got a job working on a farm on a sharecrop situation. It was 50-50. The owner of the farm had received half of the money that the grain was and the cattle were and pigs were sold for, and he got to keep half of it. But then when the war broke out in 1941, and I can remember when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor, my mother cried all day long, and I said, "Mom, why are you crying?" She said, "They've just killed so many people." And it was not the Japanese people as much as it was Hirohito, the emperor of Japan.
How old were you when this happened?
This was I was 6 years old.
Wow.
Because this happened in December 7th, 1941. So someone offered, the doctor who owned the farm, someone offered him 60%, or they would take only 40%, and the owner of the farm would get 60% of the crops and the cattle and the pigs that were sold. And so we had to move into town. And so we moved into town, and my dad continued to work for this meat packing company. He was farming and working at a meat packing plant too. But he had dug a ditch from the main road. All the roads were gravel. All the county roads were gravel. And he dug a ditch from the main road all the way to the house in order to obtain running water, because we had to, and on the farm we had to have the water shipped in, because the well was not deep enough to provide enough water for us and the animals too.
Wow.
So he dug all that, and he told the owner of the farm, he said, "Don't I get paid for this?" He said, "No, you go ahead and go to work for another farmer." And so my dad went to an attorney, and the attorney told him that, "I'll see that you get paid for your time of digging this ditch and bringing the water into the house." And we had moved to another farm to do the same kind of a 50-50 situation. And the doctor, the attorney, was able to obtain an amount of money that for the hours that my father spent digging that ditch. And it was enough money that my dad could buy a house. It was an older house, and we moved to town, and then we were able to get a place of our own. So after we moved into this house, it was over 100 years old, and there was no running water. There was electricity, but no running water or no plumbing. So my dad decided to have running water and inside plumbing. The plumbing was not up in the main part of the house, it was in the basement of the house. But I can remember at that time that we were so thankful to have running water and in the house without going out to the pump. And we had running hot water in the house and an inside toilet. I especially liked that. And in those days, everybody on the street where we lived had outhouses. And they would have, we called them honey dippers. They would come around and clean the outhouses on the street with a big truck and a suction hose. And it would be an awful aroma in the neighborhood for at least a week after that. But one of the things that kids would do in those days, on Halloween, they would say trick or treat, and they meant trick, because if you didn't get a treat when you went to the door of the house, they would tip your toilet over. And then you'd have to have someone come and pick it up again.
Wow.
But we were familiar with that, because they would, about every year you'd have to dig a new hole for the outhouse and move the outhouse over and fill in where the old.
So this indoor plumbing's a total change of pace.
It was a whole new world.
Whole new world.
For we as kids, we were so glad.
In your house, how many kids were there? How many brothers and sisters did you have?
One brother, one sister.
One brother and one sister.
And we were born at home in Missouri. There was no hospital. It just a midwife came over and delivered us children.
Wow, that's incredible. So you're going from Missouri to Iowa, following your dad on his pursuit of a career.
Yes, he worked there for 35 years at that meat packing plant.
Good for him.
But then he worked side jobs to make sure we had enough when we were children.
Now, what are you doing when you get to Iowa? What are some of the things you're getting into?
Well, the war broke out and everything was rationed during World War II. Gasoline was rationed, but we didn't have a car anyway. We had to take the bus anywhere we went. It cost 5 cents for the bus. And I can remember when a cup of coffee was 5 cents. And I worked for a company, a grocery store called Buehler Brothers. And it was a German store. and they would sell everything from pigtails to pig snouts, bacon squares. They used to cure and smoke the cheek meat of the pig.
Wow.
It was called a bacon square, and it was cheaper than regular bacon.
Was it good?
Yeah, it was good. It had the flavor.
Good.
And I can remember working, later I worked for a company in Iowa as a meat cutter, and I used to cure and smoke these bacon squares, and they had one time the pork got down to 12 cents a pound. It was so low, everybody was butchering their pigs. And so they would bring the pigs in, and they wanted everything they could to be cured and smoked. And so I can remember rubbing the cure on the sides of bacon, and after the first week we'd turn it over and rub the other side. Then we had to wash all of that out and hang it in the smokehouse.
And how old are you when you're doing all this?
Well, then it was later. I was 19 years old.
19.
But this, I learned how to cure, even turkeys. I learned how to cure and smoke turkeys. And that was quite a delicacy for New Year's Eve, a smoked turkey. And they would have their New Year's Eve parties, and they would buy a smoked turkey. And I worked and cured and smoked turkeys for called Straw Hacker Turkey Farm. It was in Iowa. And then...
So in your childhood, you start working from an early age because everything is rationed? Or?
Yeah, I worked for a farmer when I was 14.
Mm.
And he gave me room and board and $15 a week.
Wow.
And I thought I was really in heaven, you know. Getting $15 a week, that was a lot of money. And for me as a teenager, in my early teens. And I can remember the owner of the farm that I worked for, she said, "You'll have to take the milk into town." I said, "Well, I don't know how to drive." I was only 14 years old. She said, "Well, we've got a car out here." It was an older car. "You can drive, and I'll ride along with you and show you what to do." And so we drove the milk into the dairy, and I saw a little girlfriend that I knew from school, and I'm waving to her, and I ran clear off of the road up into somebody's yard because I'm waving to this girl. And she said, "You better tend to your driving." So we would take it into the dairy, and it was the same dairy where we had lived years before. Behind my aunt and uncle lived across from this dairy, and we lived in a little house behind their house. It was a small house, and my dad had to go in for surgery, and he had been in the hospital for 6 months. But these were difficult times. But my mother used to tell us when we were kids to clean up our plate. In other words, don't take out more on your plate than what you're going to eat. No, and she would say, she had to say, "Waste not, want not." I was telling Cornelia about that was her favorite saying. You didn't waste anything.
Yeah.
In
That's
fact,
a very valuable lesson.
In fact, she had a Tupperware set and a little bitty Tupperware that was about the size of a tablespoon, and she would save 1 tablespoon of mashed potatoes. They did not go to waste, and that would become a potato cake the next day.
That's awesome.
But we did not have a refrigerator. We had an ice box. And a truck would go down the street with a tarp over the ice, and we would follow that truck, and he would chip us off little bits of ice when we were kids. That was a real treat.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's it's almost inconceivable today with like our modern luxuries, but what an interesting aspect of life.
It was.
So you're 14, you're in your early teens, you're working. How are you balancing this with going to school? Are you going to school at this time?
No, this was during the summer. I worked for the farmer.
Gotcha.
But then when the school started, I had to go back to work.
Gotcha.
to school, you know. And but I can remember as a kid during the war, we went barefooted all summer because we had to save our shoes for school. Shoes were rationed, tires were rationed, gasoline was rationed, sugar was rationed, and meat, you had a limited supply of meat. My dad worked at the meat packing plant, and he would go into the employees market, and he could only buy the meat that was not suitable to send out to the stores because of the rationing, and it had to be perfect to go to the stores because meat was rationed too. You could only buy a certain amount of meat. But I can remember when the war ended in '45, we were so happy that at last we didn't have to have everything rationed. We used to open both ends of the tin cans and smash them down and then tie them up and turn them in for the war effort.
Wow.
And people who had money would buy war bonds. And they would advertise that way for the war bonds if you wanted to help the war effort. I don't know if they ever received money out of those bonds when they turned them in, but that's what they used to do.
What an interesting time to live through.
It was interesting. It makes you appreciative of what we have today. We have so much, such an abundance.
Yeah.
I can remember raising our children, how blessed we were. In 1964, we moved from Iowa to Ohio.
Okay.
And we had three children, and we moved here to go to college to prepare for the ministry.
Okay.
And we were going to become pastors, and we pastored a church in Maple Heights for 32 years.
Wow.
And then later, after we retired from there, we started attending a church on Pleasant Valley Road, Bethel Christian Assembly of God Church here in Parma. And when my wife passed away in 2015, I continued to attend there. And I was on staff for quite a while because we had already retired from the church where we had pastored for 43 years.
So to backtrack a little bit, what made you decide to pursue the life of a minister? What in Iowa, when, and what made you want to go to study this and eventually do this for your life?
Well, I attended a midnight service at the church in the neighborhood, and at that service, it was 1949, and at that service I decided I was going to live a Christian life. I would never smoke, drink, gamble, or be involved in any kind of filthy talk. And I kept true to that, and later then decided to go into ministry. But we didn't go into the ministry until 1964. We moved to Ohio to attend Mount Vernon Bible College. And then when we received our credentials, we had to serve there for 2 years, kind of a trial time, before we were ordained. And my wife and I served there in Maple Heights for 2 years, from 1967 to 1969, and we received our ordination.
That's a really interesting path to choose. So did you meet your wife before you had left? You had gone with her?
No, we met in high school.
In high school in Iowa?
Yeah, we met in high school, and she had an interesting life too, because her dad was an alcoholic, and she said she would never marry anyone who was an alcoholic. And that was the agreement. And she started going to church with me, and later she had a cousin who was a pastor, and my pastor. We took the vows together after we graduated from high school, and he did the part for me to repeat, and her cousin did the part for her to repeat. And then we decided we would raise our children in a Christian environment, and then when we decided to come to college in Ohio, we had a 52 Buick with all of our furniture and everything on a homemade trailer behind the car. And we were going through Indianapolis, Indiana, and it was a large rainstorm, like a cloudburst. And the front wheel came off the car. But fortunately, the weight of the furniture and everything behind the car kept the car from dropping down on the pavement. So here's a wheel running down the street ahead of us. And, I had heard a joke about a guy who had a flat tire in front of a mental institution, and he got out to change the tire, and he put the lug nuts on the tire that he took off, and he put them in a hubcap, and then he accidentally stepped on the hubcap, and the lug nuts went over into the weeds. This was the joke, you know. And so the people behind the fence were watching what he was doing, and he's looking for those lug nuts in the weeds. And one guy said, "Sir, why don't you take one lug nut off the other three wheels and put the wheel back on, and then you can get more lug nuts at the junkyard?" He said, "Well, that's an idea." He said, "Are you a patient in there?" He said, "Yes." He said, "Well, you're not crazy." He said, "Yes, I'm crazy, but I'm not stupid." So he put the wheel back on. So anyway, I thought of that. So I did exactly that. I took a lug nut off the other three wheels, put the wheel back on the car, and we came on into Mount Vernon, Ohio to go to college.
So you get to Ohio, you go to school here with your wife. What's the next step? Did you go straight to Maple Heights from school after your 2-year period?
They had us go to a place up in Willoughby, and it was a rental building that had a church in this rental building. And I said, "Well, I just don't feel comfortable about us going there to pastor that church." He said, "Well, how about Maple Heights? You can go to a church there." So we went to Maple Heights, and I was a little hesitant even there, but because there was no money for a salary. And so I said, "That's okay. I know how to cut meat. I can work as a meat cutter and then pastor the church."
Perfect.
So that worked out good, and they decided to keep us there for 32 years.
Wow.
So then after we retired, started drawing Social Security, we decided to come to Parma because we loved the area of Parma. And so we started attending Parma Christian down on Pleasant Valley Road, and they put us on staff. And I said, "Well, I can't do a lot because my wife is having some physical problems." And so we stayed there for about 10 years, and then she got sick and couldn't do much anymore. She got Alzheimer's and she couldn't remember how to cook. Or one day we went into Burger King, and we were eating breakfast, and we came out of Burger King, and there was a couple there, and she said, "Can you help me?" And I said, "Well, I don't know who they are." And they said, "Well, what do you need?" I said, "Will you help me? This man keeps following me around." And she pointed to me. And we'd been married all those years, you know. And I thought, oh, she's having problems. And so they separately talked to us. They called the police, and the police interviewed us separately. And it took her to the hospital, and then they said, your wife has a severe case of dementia. So she didn't know who I was. And but we had been married for over 50 years. This was in what year it was now. I'm trying to remember all these dates. But anyway, when she went into the hospital, I told them at the church, I said, I cannot continue on staff because I want to be with her every day. And I would go with her to the nursing home and stay with her. And she passed away in 2015. But this is a wonderful program you have here at Parma. And I'm so thankful to be able to come occasionally. So
Well, we're happy to have you here.
I have a good friend who brings me here. He's a veteran, and he just goes out of his way to help everybody.
Sounds like a good guy.
Yeah, he is.
Now, reflecting on this, it's obviously hard to hear about these things with your wife. I couldn't imagine what it was like dealing with that. But what was it like working with your wife and raising a family as a minister together, traveling, going from Iowa to Mount Vernon, all the way up to Northeast Ohio?
It was a difficult time, but we weren't thinking about accumulating wealth or money. We were thinking about doing God's will and doing God's work and helping people who were far worse off than we were. And so that was a comfort.
That's beautiful.
So.
And did you guys have children?
We had 3 children, and our youngest son passed away in 2017. My wife passed away in 2015. My youngest son, who we had adopted because his parents gave him up, we got him as a foster child, and then we applied for adoption, and we adopted him. He was 50 years old, and our oldest daughter was 62 years old in 2017, and she passed away 2 weeks later. So about a year ago, a little over a year ago, it'll be 2 years in October, my son called me. He lived out of state because he had some kind of a problem with his liver. He had been to Cleveland Clinic, and they removed the smaller part of the liver and took out the gallbladder. And he was getting along pretty good, and I said, well, Mike, why don't you stay with me? Because I lived alone, you know. And he said, no, I can't live in this climate, Dad. I had to go where it's a warmer climate. And he went out of state. He called me one day and he said, Dad, they stole the catalytic converter off my car. I guess they're worth money, you know. They take them off the car, steal them. And he said, I was underneath trying to put another one on, and he was 68 years old. He just turned 68, and he was having chest pains. And I said, well, get to the hospital. And he said, well, pray for me. And I said, okay, I prayed for him. And then he got to the hospital with having chest pain, and they kept him in the waiting room at the hospital. Because they couldn't take him right away. I don't know if they were waiting on the doctor or what, but he died right there in the waiting room. And his son called me and said, "Grandpa," he said, "my dad just died." I said, "Well, Jason, there's nothing I can do." I said, you talk to your sister and see what you kids want to do." And so they made some kind of arrangements. And but you know, I'm consoled in the fact that my son, both my sons, my adopted son, my birth son, and my daughter are with their mother in heaven with Jesus.
That's a beautiful way to think about it.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry that happened.
Well, you know, there's a lot of people in the world have had worse things happen, but we have to rise above it. And I think if we can just try to sum it up and to try to think in the terms of how we can, not how we can be helped so much as how we can help others who are in a worse situation. And I think if we go through life with that thought in mind, we can be of help to someone else that's less fortunate. And I think what a wonderful program you're doing here in Parma, providing the meals for people who can come here. Not only seniors, but anyone who's hungry can come here. It's a wonderful program. Thank you so much.
It's important to service our community, and
Yes.
you know, we benefit by getting interesting people like you coming in here that are able to enrich our environment. You know, you offer a very unique perspective. That's why we do stuff like this. That's why I want to hear your story. I mean, just the lessons that you've talked about now, I mean, these are very important things. These are things that should be looked at, that should be analyzed, should be taken in and used. So we're thankful for people like you.
Well, I feel so blessed to live in America and go through the hardships and come out on top and say, well, we're blessed. And there are so many people in the world that are far worse off than we are, no matter how bad we've had things happen to us.
You're right.
And it's not about gathering wealth for ourselves. The moment we stop breathing, that's all gone. But it's having the peace in our heart and know that our relationship with the Lord is right. So hopefully we can be an encouragement to everyone that we meet day by day.
It's very interesting. It's very enriching to hear.
Thank you.
So we've talked a little bit about your career. We've talked about your family. We talked about your childhood, your parents. What are some of the main differences in your life now as a senior? How have your roles changed? What's it like being a grandparent? What's it like not working for the church and directly as a minister?
Well, you know, I meet so many beautiful people who want to make life better. It's not about politics. I hear so many people get caught up in politics, but it's about obeying the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, and going that extra mile. In the early Bible days, the Jewish people could only walk a mile on the Sabbath.
Sorry about that.
They go beyond the mile, and that's where they say, go the extra mile. If someone asks, because the Roman soldiers would ask Jewish people to walk and carry their guns and their luggage and everything for a mile, because I knew they could walk a mile, and then not only walk a mile, but go the extra mile. Say, well, I can go a little further. I got enough strength to go. And I think if we could think like that, taking that lesson from the first century, that someone asks us to do something, well, is there anything else I can do? can I help you in another way? Not with the mentality of, they did me wrong and I'm going to get even. You know, you don't balance the scale that way. You show a little kindness. And that's what I would think from that, you know. To show kindness one to another. I have a friend who brings me here when I can come, you know. And he's so nice. He served in the military in Vietnam, and he would never ask for anything, but he would want to know how he can be of help. And it's nice to have friends like that.
Definitely.
Yes.
So would you say at this point in your life, the big lessons that you've learned, the philosophies that you live under, those would be things like empathy, kindness? What are
Yes.
some other things that come to mind?
Well, I would say to try to see the good in somebody, even if their political view is different. Point out the good and say, what can I do? How can I be of help to you? And go that extra mile. And I think that's the answer. We may have a car. My car is almost 20 years old, but it's still running, and it still goes where I need to go. That's all I need, you know. Transportation. When I was young, my dad didn't have a car. He'd ride the bus. Only cost a nickel, but a nickel was worth more than it is today. So I think just go the extra mile.
Interesting. Like your friend that takes you here, he goes the extra mile.
Yeah.
It's nice to be surrounded by people that do that, and it's nice to hear, you know, the preaching of that message.
So instead of trying to get even to someone who does you wrong, see what you can do for them.
Words to live by.
Yes, it is.
I like it.
Thank you.
Now, my final question is going to be a personal question.
Okay.
So I'm 22. I'm a college student. I'm all over the place, city to city, job to job, doing this, doing that. What would your advice be to me, or to people like me, all the people in my particular situation? When you were 22, what do you wish you could tell yourself? What do you wish you could tell me?
You don't always achieve the goal that you set out for, but it's a learning experience. I wanted to be an artist because I had a little bit of an artistic ability, but I decided that I could do more good for myself and for others by going in the ministry, and I could help more people. You can paint a good picture or draw a good picture of someone, a likeness of that person or a cartoon, which is nice, but you can go a little bit further than that by helping somebody that needs help. That would be my advice.
That is very good advice.
Thank you.
Now, before you leave us, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? I mean, your story has been very interesting, inspiring. I mean, I've learned a lot from your story. Is there anything else you would want to portray?
Well, it's not about money. It's about kindness. So, in watching this, I have been watching this political thing in our country right now, and I can't listen to it. It's too bad, and I've seen it have an effect on my daughter, the only child I have left. My daughter, she's having pain in her chest. I hope it's not her heart. They did a lot of tests on her. She's 66 years old, and she asked me to pray for her yesterday. She came by the house. She does my laundry. She buys my groceries. She checks on me. And I said, honey, you can't deal with this stress. It'll affect you physically. And stress is a killer. And I think, in fact, we have to forget about, we should vote. And how we vote is up to us. But there's a lot of phony baloney going on too, and I don't think it's good.
I think you're right. Well, it's been very interesting talking to you. I know that a lot of the messages and the lessons that you've conveyed reign true. And you've talked about how blessed you feel. We're very blessed here to have you in here today sharing your story with us. I know a lot of good can come out of sharing a story like yours, so I appreciate you coming in today.
Well, I am blessed to be able to come here for a meal and to share things with you and the good friends that I have at the church and in the community too. I have good neighbors.
That's all you can ask for.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, great.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Okay.